Good morning, everybody. We'll be starting in 1 minute. Okay. All right. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this morning's program. It's our concluding program for Holocaust Education Week, unfortunately. But my name is Daniel Reed. I'm the Education Coordinator for the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach. And I want to welcome you all to what's going to be a very, very special program, very special morning with Dr. Miriam Klein Kassenoff, Running and Hiding from the Nazis, My Miraculous Escape from the Oncoming Holocaust. So this is part of the programming that the Holocaust Memorial does annually for Holocaust Education Week. And we do a lot of programs, whether virtually or in person, for the community. And one of the things that we try and do with the more than in usual times, more than 100,000 people that visit the memorial annually, or the more than 10,000 students that visit, or for this year viewing online, is we try to teach about the Holocaust and to adults and the next generation, to the youth of today, to examine their own hearts, to learn the lessons of the Holocaust, and to fight against hatred, bigotry, racism, and anti-Semitism. So we hope that this program contributes to that mission. I did mention that this is a concluding event for Holocaust Education Week, but before we begin, just one quick thing. We do have one last event on Sunday, November 15th, that I hope that you all can tune in for. At 2:30 p.m. on Channel 10 WPLG, they will be broadcasting the Names Not Numbers documentary that a group of students from several different schools in Miami-Dade County, including Miami Beach Senior High School and other schools, did. And it's an amazing documentary about their process and also the survivors that they interviewed. So I encourage you all to see that at 2:30 p.m. Channel 10 on Sunday. So on behalf of the Board of Directors and the staff of the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach, I want to thank you again for joining us today. And this brings me to a couple of quick introductions. We have two special guests with us. Most importantly, Dr. Miriam Klein Kassenoff, who is going to be telling us the story of how her and her family escaped from Nazi-occupied Europe. Miriam is many things. She is a teacher. She has taught hundreds of people, thousands of teachers over the years about the importance of teaching the Holocaust in the classroom. She is chair of our Holocaust Education Week and Education for the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach, and is the curriculum supervisor on Holocaust Miami-Dade County Public Schools. About her, I want her to tell her story. This event is a friend of the memorial as well, Mr. David Reese, who is a teacher of language arts at Miami Beach Senior High School, and a friend of the memorial. And every year, for more years than I can count, he has brought the entire 9th grade over to the memorial to visit and learn from the Holocaust survivors. And David, we're going to have to think about another more way of doing that this year. So, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. And yes, I think innovation is the name of the game this year. I'd just like to make a brief introduction to everyone watching as well, and turn it over to Miriam in just a moment. My name is David Reese. As Danny said, I'm a language arts teacher here at Miami High. I'm in my 20s. And in a moment, I'll introduce Miriam, and I get to call her Miriam. I've known her for a while, so I know that's okay. And then we're gonna have about a 35-minute conversation, and we'll hear Miriam Miriam's narration of her miraculous escape from the oncoming Holocaust. And then we'll have a moderated chat by the third person who's on the call, which is our tech Cody this morning. So I just want to say a couple of things. We've had the honor at Beach High to participate in this event, the Miami Beach Holocaust Memorial Holocaust Education Week, for at least the last decade, during which time several thousand students and staff members at our school bring their remembrances and testimonies of some of the darkest days of human experience, when the institutions of democracy gave way to fascism and intolerance in its worst form. Hearing from a Holocaust survivor, or in Miriam's case, a child survivor, I think is best described as an experience. It's different from the experience watching film or reading a book or listening to a TED Talk. During today's event, we'll hear a story from a person who's going to talk about perseverance. She's going to talk about great acts of kindness that enabled her family to escape from Europe, and very few could. You'll hear about deep and abiding love for family and a studying spirituality and undergirds Miriam's life. As a teacher, I've had the privilege of learning from Miriam for at least the last dozen years through her University of Miami Holocaust Education Institutes. And at these institutes, I just think, I don't know if we'll get a chance to say it, but Miriam has taught tens of, I want to say tens of, but definitely thousands of educators like my, responsible, in a truthful, in a factual, and also in an inspiring way. And it's had a great effect on my practice and many, many other people. I've also relied on Miriam in her other title. She's the district education specialist for Holocaust education in Miami-Dade County Public Schools. So I often turn to her when I have a question or when a project comes up. And so I've often relied on her advice, her mentorship, and I can say just share inspiration as well. So without further ado, and I just want to say that I told Miriam I wouldn't go into a long introduction, but I knew I could get it in. I'd like to introduce her now. Hello, Miriam.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Beach High. I'm so thrilled that you and whatever other schools and teachers and community people are here today. Thank you, David, for that beautiful introduction. And my love and respect to my colleague, Sharon Horowitz, the Executive Director of the Holocaust Memorial, and Danny, the Education Coordinator, for putting me on the program this year. It's been a wonderful week, and I seem to be the culminating act. So thank you. With the limited time that we have, let me see if we can get through my telling you this fabulous story. Thank you for inviting me to give my testimony of escaping with my parents from Nazi-occupied Europe on the eve of the Holocaust in 1940-41. Today's presentation, that will be by interview with David, is not specifically about the Holocaust, the murder of the Jews of Europe, but certainly because of the Holocaust. Yet it is more a story of escape, hiding, and being on the run from the Nazi Holocaust. And it specifically answers that often asked question, why didn't the Jews just leave? As though it would have been that easy to do so. So I have a story to tell you. It's a true story of fear, hiding, running, escape, strength, resilience, and hope. Let me begin with the first slide. David, that's my father in the upper left-hand corner, the late Rabbi Maurice Klein of Temple Emmanuel in Miami Beach. That's my mother in the lower left-hand, the late Sarah Klein. That's my brother in the middle, the late federal judge Ted Klein. And that's my mother who attended my last teacher institute. I don't know if you ever had a chance to meet her. She lived to 99. And I am the only one left now of this family to tell the story.
I did not have a chance to meet your mother, but was fortunate to attend many of those institutes. I should just also mention, I want to say before you go on to the next slide that we are in a kind of a interview format. Miriam has done this talk in many different places in many different ways, and the way this has always been set up has been a kind of a conversation. We call it first person conversation. So that's what we're going to try to do today. And Miriam, so I know that you've given this talk as different names. You want to talk us through the other sort of thoughts behind
So I have called it also the power of perseverance, because that's what the story is about. And Yad Vashem in Israel, who prepared this slide for me, calls it the fate of two sisters, and you'll find out why very shortly.
Okay, so let's see what we're looking at here. This looks like a record of arrival, and I see 4 names on there. Can you talk us through what we're looking at here and how you came to have it?
Yes. About 20 years ago, I was sitting at the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach. I had a little desk there as a volunteer education chairperson. And the secretary at the time had left this book for me to look at on the desk. And as I turned the pages, I suddenly realized that although I'd been searching for my past all my life, that there was a picture on the front cover, or well, not on the front cover, but on one of the pages of the book, of the ship that I had come over on in 1941, the Ciudad de Seville. And at the bottom of the book, it said, for further information, call the Hayas, Hebrew Immigration Aid Society in New York, and ask for a man named Valery Bajarov. So I called, and Mr. Bajarov came on, and he said in his heavy Russian accent, "What can I do for you?" And I told him my name and that I know I came over on the Ciudad de Seville in 1941, and I needed more information. And he said, "What's your name again? Let me call you back." So I put down the phone and I turned to the secretary at the memorial and I said, "Well, I'm sure I'm never going to hear from him again." But then in 15 minutes, he called back and he said to me, "Was your father Maurice Klein, rabbi?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Was your mother Sally?" And I said, "No, no, 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 you have the wrong family." And he said, "And were you Mary?" And I said, "No, that's not my name." And then he said, "And did you have a brother Tibor?" And then I knew that he had found my family. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I have your record of arrival here, June 14th, 1941. And I have been hired specifically to find families who came from Lisbon, Portugal, and who arrived in America in 1940, 41, 42. And I've been looking for you." I had chills up my spine, and I was so taken aback that I had finally made a connection. And I said, "Well, can you fax those papers over to me?" We didn't have scanning, I don't think, then. And he said, "Oh, no, no, these are original documents. You have to come to New York." And so I did go to New York, and he gave me a stack of papers this thick, this big. And he said, "Here you are, here's your life, here's your journey." And when I brought it home, I didn't know what to do with it. I had not yet honed my research skills. But what I did was I laid all the papers out here in the apartment, on the bed, on the floor, everywhere. And each day I started to put the papers together in chronological order. And thus, from the memories of my parents and relatives, I was able to put together the chronology of this story that I'm going to tell you now.
So fascinating. Miriam, I just thinking now about what you were saying, and I'm wondering, when was it that you were at that little desk? And I just, people might not understand the situation. Behind me is Dade Boulevard.
Yeah.
And just down the street, if I had a better arm, is the Miami Beach Holocaust Memorial, where Miriam was sitting that day when she came across that record of arrival. And it just dawned on me, like, how your life can sort of take a new direction. When was that? Do you recall what year that was?
I don't. I don't know what day it was. I know it was before Sharon and Annie came to the memorial. It must have been about 15 years ago. And what I found was this. So this is how I tell the story.
Sure. So, okay, so now we have these photographs. Were these also obtained from the HIAS office that day?
No,
These
the photographs that you're going to see in the next, I hope I can get through this. We're going to have to move along quickly, unfortunately. The photographs that you're going to see are pictures that my mother grabbed before we left, which I'm getting ahead of the journey. So let me explain to you why I show the photographs, and then I'll show the documents from the HIAS. So it seemed that in the early 1930s, my dad was a young rabbinical student in Košice, where I was born, the city I was born in. And he was sent by my grandfather to a very prestigious place to study for his smicha, his rabbinate degree, and that would have been Munkach, which was close by, but not close enough for him to come home for weekends, for Shabbat. So just like many of you out there who have children who go to college or go away, he was always looking for a place to go for a weekend for Shabbat. And what he discovered was that in the city of Munkach, there were two beauty queens. They were twins. Their names were Sarah and Lily. And their father was a famous rabbi in Munkach. So my dad got himself invited for Shabbat to spend Shabbat at this beautiful twins' homes, figuring he knew he had to bring home a wife to Košice. So, why not two beautiful women? Maybe he'll choose one or the other. Well, as it turns out, their names were Sarah and Lily, and he chose Lily. How he chose Lily, I don't know, because look at how identical they are. There was only one problem, as the story goes. Lily could not stand my father. She already had a boyfriend. And so there began what I call the conspiracy of the Munkach twins, in that Lily dumped my father on to my mother, Sarah, who did like him. And my dad really never knew until a week before the wedding that he was marrying the wrong twin. And as the story goes, he said, well, that's okay. We'll learn to love each other. And so they did for over 65 years. And there on the bottom is my father and my mother. And over here is Lily and her boyfriend, Joseph, that she eventually married. Now, he brought her home to Košice, and then the winds of war began. But I was born then. By the way, my birthday is today.
Oh,
So I am spending my birthday morning with 400 people and with you. So I was born, and this is the last picture that was taken of me before we fled Europe. Let me just move on quickly because I am concerned about time. That this is what I grew up in. This was Jewish life in Košice before the war. And I show this to you, and particularly to the teachers out there, that I always stress that when you teach the Holocaust, be sure and teach life before the Holocaust. Because as Abba Kovner, the famous poet survivor, has said, how do you know what we lost if you don't even know what we had? And so students and teachers, look, Jewish youths, they were not always in prison uniforms. They were like you. They went and had picnics on the banks of the rivers as you go to the ocean here. There's an Orthodox synagogue for those of you who go to temple or to church. My father was rabbi at that synagogue with his father. There's a Jewish wedding, and all this was taken away. Here is the last picture that was taken of my mom, myself, and my infant brother before we fled. And there's the street that I lived on. But all this was taken away when my dad in 1940 was taken to a forced Hungarian Nazi labor camp. And I remember that night, it was Shabbat, and the Hungarian fascist police broke into our home and took my dad in front of my eyes. And I didn't know why. And my mother said it was because we were Jewish. And it was the first time that I experienced or knew anything about something being wrong with being Jewish. Now, it looks like these people are happy, but those were propaganda pictures taken. They worked at hard labor. And my
Miriam,
dad
may I
finally
just, I
escaped.
think, Miriam, I know that you're concerned about time. I'm watching the time as well. I think we're okay. I do think
Okay.
we're okay. I don't think we have to speed through because I want to kind of just emphasize a few of the things you said so that they don't get lost. One thing is, I was, happy birthday. Okay. First of all, I didn't say that at the start, and that certainly should have been something that we said at the beginning. But I was looking at that smiling, how old were you there? 4 or 5-year-old girl in the previous picture. If you go back a couple slides.
Yeah.
And
So I was 4 when it was time to leave in December 1940. And I was 5 by the time we arrived in America in June 1941.
right. So I just wanted to emphasize that for students who are learning about this subject, for teachers who are teaching it, what you said there is we teach sort of chronologically, usually when we try to teach about the Holocaust, so we can recognize what was lost. And this is a good example of what was lost, right? A happy childhood that you had. So I just wanted to sort of slow there. And so let's go back then to where we were with the Hungarian labor camp and the arrest that evening of your father. Was that a memory that you remember, that moment in time? I sometimes think about this question. I've been able to talk to many people who were Holocaust survivors or child survivors over the years. And it seems like as a 4 or 5-year-old, this would be maybe when you were coming into one of your first memories. Was this a stark memory for you? Did you recognize what was going on around you at that point when your father was arrested?
That's a very good question. One of the things we have to understand about memory and survivors is that the older survivors who were 16, 17, and were taken to the ghettos and the camps that you all have met have very direct memory. The younger survivors, such as myself, who are called child survivors, we were anywhere from the age of a year to 6 years, 7 years. Our memories are recalled moment of trauma memories. And also, many of our memories are mixed in with what we heard our parents talking about as we were growing up, that we were able possibly then to connect. For example, with me, I do remember, I think any 5-year-old that would be having dinner with their family and police came in and grabbed that father or the mother, they would have that memory. So I have glimpses of memories that I can talk about as we move along. And yes, that memory I have. And the, should I move along?
Yes,
The
that's
next
fine.
memory-
I just wanted to make sure we kind of had the sense of
Yeah.
the time of your life, and that you're as a child survivor is a little different maybe than some stories that others might have heard from somebody who, as you were saying, were 15, 16 years old and rounded up and all of that particular story. Your story is going to be a different story. So what are we looking at?
Well, then the
Here.
next memory that I had was that my dad escaped from the camp, which we can talk about how he did that later in Q&A if there, if we get to that. And he came home and he said to my mother, "You didn't want to leave earlier, but I've escaped now and they're going to come get me and they're going to murder all the Jews of Europe." He had heard that in the camp. And he said, "I have papers, I have prepared them with your older," let me explain something. We talked about my mom having a twin sister, but my mom had an older sister who had left Europe in late 1920s. She had met a traveling student from Chicago, Illinois, and he married her and took her to America. So Aunt Bessie was living in Chicago when the war broke out and when Hitler came to power. And my dad and she had been corresponding. She was a very well-read and very educated woman. And she kept saying to my father, "Things are not going to be good for the Jews. You need to get paperwork together as fast as possible. I will find a support synagogue here in Chicago for you." So my dad had all that ready. And when he came home in November 1940 and December 1940, escaping from the camp, he said to my mother, "If we don't leave now, we'll never get out." My mother, realizing then that indeed she would have to leave, took me to my Aunt Lily's house. We went to visit regularly in Munkach. It was about a 4-hour train ride, and said, "Lily, come, you must come. It's dangerous." Lily was already married with 2 small children. And what I also remember, the second memory I have, was Lily telling my mother, "Are you crazy? Where are we going to go? I'm not going anywhere. And what will happen to us here will happen to you while you're on the road. We're staying." And so that kind of answers that question also about decision making, who left, who stayed, why.
Right.
And so we began our route of escape. And here is the map for that.
Excuse me, right. That's what I was thinking as we were saying that question that you started the discussion with. Why didn't more people leave? And it seems like your family had some very specific circumstances that sort of said to your very industrious father, who we know, right? We need to leave now. And that there was an argument almost in your house that had led to that decision in your house. So this map then, and I don't know if we mentioned where Kasha or Košice is, and it's what is now Eastern Czechoslovakia and was Slovakia at that time, right? So that's where your journey begins, your journey of escape.
Yeah, it was Hungarian also at the time. So my language is Hungarian. And if you know, we went through Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Italy, France. When our goal was to get to Lisbon, Portugal, where there were ships waiting to take Jews that the Hayas had prepared. My dad had reservations for a ship, the Nyasa. However, we were not going to be able to make that because what happened was when we got to Spain, Spain was neutral, but it was playing games with the Nazis. They were sometimes with the Nazis, sometimes not. And what happened was when you got to the border of Spain, depending on what kind of guards, border guards you met, you could get through, or if you didn't have all your paperwork exactly right, and if you didn't bribe enough money, then you would be sent back. So according to the testimony I had from my mother, she evidently somehow or other, holding two small children, convinced the border guard to at least let us stay in a hotel until we got our paperwork ready. And so we were interred, indeed. I'm going to just skip over to the letter. And this is the letter document that I'm not going to read it in detail, but it's a very important document in that while my family and I were interred in this hotel, my dad, being a very friendly man, met this non-Nazi German tourist who felt so sorry for the family that he offered to help us if my dad would write in his word, in his handwriting, he would dictate to my dad a letter to the Lisbon Jewish community to see if they could help us because our money was gone. And so let me just, may I quickly read this paragraph to you? We are here in this hotel, interred with two small children, a 4-year-old little girl and a baby boy of 10 months. The children suffer from hunger. We are used to hunger, but it is tragic to see how it affects the innocent children. If it is possible, please help me, Jewish brothers, because the situation is tragic. I'm not even in a situation to pay for the hotel because my money is gone. We have money in a Lisbon bank, but we can't get to the money because it's in Lisbon. Please intervene, if not for me, then for my children's sake. Receive my greetings, my Jewish brothers, Rabbi Maurice Klein. As you can hear my voice cracking, that even now, as I read that, it's so emotional for me because I try to put myself back in my parents' position, so scared that they have been running and hiding since December. They're finally almost at their destination. And here they are arrested in a hotel. They don't have their paperwork to move on. They don't have money. And they're worried that my brother and I will starve. And so it's a very emotional letter for me to read. May I?
But I just
Can I
want
move
to,
on?
may I, Miriam? I'm sorry.
Sure.
May I just point out, because it's a very emotional letter to hear, because you can hear in the sound of your voice, which is the sound of your father's voice, that he's doing everything that he can to make sure that you and your family survive and that his children survive. And it's such a profound thing to think about. And just also the act of kindness from a stranger, right?
Yeah.
Who sort of looked at your family situation and basically took sympathy. And I'm sure at some level of maybe danger to himself, went ahead and tried to get the word out, this letter out. So
Yes.
such a remarkable thing. Anything else you'd like to add about it? I'm sorry, I don't want to cut off anything you'd like to say.
What I want to do is get to Lisbon.
Okay.
So what I'm showing here now is all the paperwork that we needed just to get into Lisbon. And finally, it must have worked because we did finally arrive in Lisbon, but we missed the Nyasa ship that we had reservations for. So the Lisbon community was wonderful. There were about 1,500 Jews living in Lisbon at the time, and they were helping Jewish refugees. By the way, people like Chagall were coming through at the time. So since we missed that ship, what they did was they put us into little boarding houses and little pensions. And my dad then would go to the consul every day, the Hayas offices, and he would leave, my mom and dad would do that. And he would leave me taking care of 5-year-old of my little infant brother while he tried to get paperwork. So I'm going to move on quickly now, David, if you don't mind, because I want to get to the boarding the ship. On May 15th, the Ciudad de Sevilla came along, and finally, we boarded this ship, and we stopped in Cuba on May 30th for 24 hours. I'd like to read to you what it was like to be on the ship. The dangers that lay ahead from the moment we left Lisbon and boarded the ship assaulted the passengers from the first day at sea. Rumors circulated there was a shortage of drinking water, and passengers panicked as distraught mothers worried about their small children. The ship could not sail a direct course because the German Navy had turned the Atlantic Ocean into a maritime battlefield. The seas were turbulent. Many were sick from the turbulence, including me. I remember that. And when the storm subsided and the sea was calm, the observant Jews were seen on deck, as my father was, putting on his talit, his prayer shawls, and praying to God to get us to safety after all we had been through, just not to die on the ship and be thrown in the ocean. My mother was terrified, not letting me out of her sight. I do remember all of this with clarity. One morning, I am quoting now from a writer who wrote this description of the ship. One morning, a flock of gulls appeared, swooping down and sailing on the crests of foam-laced waves. Gulls, said the passenger, we must be approaching land. Our family realized New York. We had finally arrived safely in the harbor of New York, and then New Jersey, I'm later to find out, Hoboken to be specific. We disembark into the turmoil of immigration, answering questions, pushing, crowding, handing over documents, officials asking and asking questions, my dad desperately searching for his papers, my mom grasping my hand for dear life while holding on to my infant brother in her arms. Finally, my dad searching endlessly in the crowd for my Aunt Bessie, for someone to help us, where to go, what to do. I feel and breathe my parents' fear, and I'm afraid. No one is there to greet us. My aunt did not realize that this was the ship we were to come on. So finally, we did get taken to a shelter, and my aunt finally arrived, and we started our lives in Chicago, Illinois. And this is the manifest. What I like best here is that they're not sure of my age, so I make myself a year younger. This is the Hayas office that my dad went to in Lisbon and waited in long lines. This is what happened to the rest of the Jews from Kasho. 15,000 of them were taken to Auschwitz and immediately murdered. And finally, our life started in America. My parents wanted an American child, and so my brother Hank was born. I became who I am today, a Holocaust educator. My brother Tibor, unfortunately, after being appointed the first child survivor to sit on the federal bench by a president, tragically died within a year after my mother died. Actually, my brother died first, and then my mother died of a broken heart. And so I'm the last one left. And we started a new life when we came here, but we made it. And I will just end with thoughts from my son. And I think this is important because so many people don't realize, or they wonder if the children are listening. And a year after my mother died, my son David, who lives in Jacksonville, who's an attorney, wrote this beautiful memoir. I don't know if you could see the whole thing. Today is the day I don't have a candle at work, but I set aside a few moments to let the memories flow in. My most vivid memory of her is the first time she told me the story of escaping from Europe. Until then, it always seemed to me that she was so quiet, submissive. I was probably 11 or 12. And when she told me the story, it was riveting. She was suddenly as powerful and strong in the way she spoke as she must have been helping guide your family. So the children are listening. And I also like that he gave a tribute to my mother, because it was my father that really put together and persevered, but it was my mother who held us together and always had hope that we would make it alive to America. So I thank you all for listening, and I'm open to any comments or questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Such an incredible story, and every time I think that it's said, I believe that your parents are listening, your brother's listening, your aunt is listening. So we do have 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 17 minutes left here. And what we thought we would do is try to take some questions through the chat. If anybody has a question, I will say that I have already received some questions from my students in my Holocaust Studies class that I'm teaching for the first time here at Miami Beach High as an elective at our school. And I could start with one of those so that we could hear the thoughts of students. They knew a little bit about your story, but not much. And so here are a few things that I thought you might like to speak to. Is educating people, what you just did was education. That's what it was for me, for everybody who was listening, right? Is educating people worth having to retell your story and remember what happened? We could hear, that was a student's question. Is educating people worth having to retell your story and remember what happened?
I'm not clear. Maybe it's the mask or whatever.
I apologize. So I'm gonna say it again. I think the question gets at, that was painful, right? And I always think this as I am amazed at people telling these stories. It's painful to tell it. Is it worth it? That's what the student is asking. Is the telling of the story worth it?
Let me ask the student, does he or she think it's worth it? What did he or she gain from the story? And I can only judge that question by the answer from the student. So,
Well,
last,
I think the question is asked, is directed at the question of whether or not you feel, and I think you expressed it, quite frankly, when you say the children are listening and you have a feeling that people are listening to the story and learning from it. I think the question is asked in the sense of, this was one of the hardest times of your life, and many people don't want to recall a lot of the difficult times of their life.
okay, I get it. So I told the story last night to Tennessee for an hour and a half, and here I am again telling the story again. Will I have dreams and nightmares tonight? Yes. Every time I tell the story, I either dream about my brother or my mother or some part of it. Is it worth it? Yes. Yes. The pain of retelling is worth it. And I think that's what I feel, and that most of the older survivors who were in camps and ghettos and starvation, I think that there's something sitting here in most of us. I point to my chest and to my heart that it's like the poem, The Ancient Mariner, that you just have to get those words out. You just have to tell this story, and that you hope that in sharing it, somebody out there, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a student, whether it be a community person, leader, some piece of that story resonates so that they can start to think about what intolerance, anti-Semitism, inhumane acts can do to just one person or one family, and make their mind up that they're going to do something about stopping that. So right now, that's a very difficult question, but a good question. That would be my spontaneous answer. Yeah.
Indeed. And let me follow with something like that, right? A question that what you just said makes me think of here, that is also from a student, because your experience is unique, but it's also quite shared, right? If we think of how many hundreds of thousands of immigrants there are today.
Yes.
And so the question was childhood as an immigrant.
Wow, your students are
Indeed.
really smart. You know, I don't have a really good memory of the first 5 years. I don't. I didn't have a doll. No, I don't. And my memories of early immigration here are not that great either. As I told my audience last night, our family ultimately settled in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And there's a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio called Shaker Heights, which is a very wealthy suburb. And so we had a lot of very wealthy Jewish cousins that just didn't seem to get it.
Right.
They just didn't understand what we had just been through.
Right.
Remember, we were one of the first families to arrive here. And my distinct memory is that I had to start public school here. I had no idea what public school meant. My mother was totally confused. And I went to kindergarten with a long taffeta prom dress that a Shaker Heights relative left on my doorstep. And to this day, I remember the humiliation of walking into kindergarten in America with a prom dress. So those early years were very difficult for all of us. My dad didn't have his American rabbinate degree,
Mhm.
so he had to go from city to city to city as a Hebrew school teacher until finally he got his American semicha. My mother was not typical American Jewish woman. She didn't know how to play mahjong. She didn't play bridge. She didn't know where she was for years. I was the one who came home from school every day, taught my parents English, and took on the role of being parent to my parents because I was the only one who was going to school and was learning how to be an American.
Were you
I
learning the language at that time?
I
How
was
was your English?
well, I spoke Hungarian, but I immediately took to the English language. And as you know, David, I'm a certified degree English teacher.
I'm well aware of it. I know you're a very harsh critic when it comes to editing and revision. I'm quite aware of it.
When I taught at Beach High, I was an English teacher before I started my Holocaust education career. So I have a master's degree in English, language arts, world literature. It's my first love, but I combine it a great deal with my work as a Holocaust educator. Our family had a very difficult time. They did. My brother Ted, who became the judge, he overcame it beautifully. He learned how to swim. He learned how to ski. He learned how to be a real American. Um, and then I have a brother that is American, Hank Klein, who lives in Coconut Grove. And so we have this multi-generational thing going on in our family. And I see a question here, what happened to my aunt in Europe? And that's always asked. So let me tell you that we never found her. However, uh, last year at this time, almost, I was in Washington, D.C., and I did go over to the museum research department, and miraculously, we found uh, a Lily Berkowitz. She had married a Joseph Berkowitz, and she had two small children who would be my age today. And we know that she was deported to Auschwitz. But what happened? Did she die at Auschwitz? Well, the researchers found 5 Lily Berkowitzes. And the one that would be closest possibly to my aunt, what they found was that if it's she, that she survived Auschwitz, not her husband, and not my cousins, the little girls, but that she possibly survived. And if it's her, the last she was seen was in a DP camp and never heard from again. I don't know if it's her or not. I'm continuing the search. So I see another question. Somebody asked about something else. I lost it though. That looked very interesting though.
There was a question earlier that I thought you would want to speak to. Could this have been different if your aunt wasn't in the U.S.? Do you think that it would have turned out differently?
What a wonderful question. If I understand it is, if my Aunt Bessie hadn't have been here, would we have, I believe that I would have died in Auschwitz. It was only that, because all of Košice went to Auschwitz in 1944. It was only because my aunt persevered here in Chicago and was able to get the support papers for my dad to come to America and push my dad, to push my mother. She wanted her sister. And that's a really good question. I think the story would have ended differently. Yeah.
I had another one from a student that I wanted to ask kind of as a follow-up. I know there's a story that you tell in some of the institutes about an encounter with anti-Semitism that you had as a teacher here in Miami. And I'm just wondering if, sort of following up on what you said earlier, though, you mentioned that when you first arrived, there were many who just couldn't fathom what you were talking about, or what people escaping from Europe were talking about, and didn't believe it. Have you met people who do not believe what you're telling them, and have you ever had that experience?
Oh, well, I think you're conflating two different issues.
I am conflating two different things, and I want to parse them out. So
okay, so being a child survivor is a whole other discussion, which one day I hope maybe my institute can have a program on Zoom of the different levels of survivors. Child survivors like myself have had a very difficult time in the history of survivorship of the Holocaust, because so many of us were so very young, and because of the memory issues, and because we, as we grew up, knew that the older survivors had had horrible, horrible experiences that were totally different from ours, most of us stepped back in order to allow the older survivors to tell their stories of what happened to them in the ghettos and the camps and so forth. And so many of us stood back, as Sharon and Danny know. For years, I stood back, and I had a great deal of difficulty all these years, even calling myself a survivor. And then finally, both Yad Vashem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Claims Conference that dispenses funds to survivors finally developed the category and definition that all of us who were either hidden or had to leave our lives, or they were disrupted, or were on the run, or in hiding, open or underground hiding, are considered survivors of the Holocaust. And so, yes, I had a very difficult time for many, many years. I didn't know which direction to go in. So I went first in the direction of academics. I got my doctorate degree. I felt, well, if I'm not accepted immediately as a survivor, then at least I can educate. So now that I'm older and one of the few left of my generation, as the older survivors are gone, our stories are coming to light, and I'm very happy to be able. That's why, going back to the very first question, is it worth it? The pain?
Yes.
It's worth it because I'm the last generation of witnesses. And if I don't tell the story, then who will? Except maybe my son or my daughter or my grandchildren. I hope that kind of comprehensively answers what you were getting to. It wasn't that people were anti-Semitic. It was just that there was this hierarchy of who's a survivor and who's not. So let me make it clear now that all of us who were between 1933 and 1945 disrupted our lives, whether in hiding in the open, whether in hiding underground, whether we hid with Gentiles, whether we hid with Christians, whether we were running as I was, or we were in a ghetto, or we were in a camp. We are survivors of the Holocaust, and we are here to transmit that information to the next generation so that it doesn't happen again to any other ethnic, cultural, or religious group of people.
And we should just point out as well, there's 409 people listening to your story today. And so,
well, I expect all of them to be singing happy birthday to me right now.
well, I'm looking at the chat and you're getting quite a few happy birthdays. There's many messages in the chat here, but unfortunately it's 10:29, and we did set out for an hour, And so I want to just see if there's any last thoughts you want to leave us with, if there's anything that wasn't said, and then you can go and enjoy your birthday. And what an honor it was for you to share it with us. And I just hope everybody on the call recognizes that this is how important it is for Miriam to be able to share this story, this incredible story. But I'll turn it over to you for the last word, Miriam.
Thank you. It's kind of ironic, isn't it, that I taught at Beach High. I started my career of teaching the Holocaust while at Beach High. And here I am speaking mainly to Beach High, although I know there's 403 other people. My last words are that there is only one way we're all going to survive and get through the day and through life, and that's to have a lot of love and kindness in our hearts. We need to all, as Barack Obama said, I did not say that, we need to, instead of turning against each other, start turning towards each other. We need to make other people feel good about themselves, no matter who they are, no matter what religion. We need to build community. We need to learn to love, not to hate, because love really brings out such beautiful feelings that we could get rid of all hatred, all anti-Semitism, all anti-anything, if we just stopped and listened to the next person that's different from us. They're in pain too. Listen to them, learn from them. That's my message to everyone.
Well, what a beautiful and powerful message, Miriam. And thank you very much for sharing your morning with us. And thank you to everybody else who gave us a little bit of time this morning to hear this remarkable story.
Thank you, David.
I'll turn it back to Danny. Thank you, Miriam.
All right, just David, I cannot compete with that. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your story. You know, it really means so much to us that you continue to do this, and especially to all the students and adult learners out there that joined us. Thank you so much. And David, thank you for organizing this and for directing traffic, as they say. I really, really appreciate it. So I want to wish everyone a peaceful weekend, Shabbat Shalom, and we will be having a lot more events as well in the coming months. And thank you for joining us, Miriam. Thank you so much, David. Goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Going to have my birthday cake now.
You deserve it. You deserve it.